Hey everyone, today let's look at the characters of Dead by Daylight who worship the entity. That's right, characters who worship the spider god in the sky of the trials. The first and most obvious case of this is of course the Plague, or Adiris, seen to literally pray to the entity in the lobby. Adiris came to worship the entity in an interesting way, and she's actually responsible for far more than just worshipping it, but we'll get into that. Adiris lived back in ancient Babylon, and she precedes all of the characters of the realm, being from the furthest back point in time despite her coming to the realm somewhere during the middle for us, chronologically. Time is weird in the realm, but from our world perspective, Adiris lived the furthest back out of anyone. In ancient Babylon, she was taken in at a young age by a man named Haban, after she was left at the steps of the Temple of Purgation, presumably by her parents, leaving her there in hope she'd be cared for, as they presumably couldn't do it. The lore does state that she was the youngest of a family of 7, and was just 5 when this happened. So from a young age, Adiris was definitely traumatized, as she would remember her family and parents, and understand she had been abandoned, which could very well have been what drew the entity's attention to her in the first place. It's also what brings religion into Adiris' life, with her believing that the gods of Babylon must have some kind of plan for her, otherwise she wouldn't have suffered like this, or been abandoned. The man who takes her in, Haban, is also highly religious, and is the high priest of Babylon at the time. This leads Adiris to become very devout to the Babylonian gods, with her working at the Temple of Purgation from a young age, preparing ceremonial meals, polishing incense burners, and praying at night for her purpose to be revealed. As Adiris grows, she joins the high-ranking priest during the yearly worshipping of the sea goat, the god of water and creation, and she feels a bliss, bringing her close to the gods, and taking on new purification ritual jobs, further joining the Maiden Guard, where she performs more ritual sacrifice. This is where Adiris' mentor Haban falters, and realizes one day that their entire religion has been a sham. He was wrong, their religion brings about pain. He plans to leave Babylon entirely, and wants Adiris to come with him to not waste her life. This strikes Adiris hard, who had devoted herself to the gods, and Haban tells her to let the gods' silence be her answer. During a tough time of reflection within the temple, Adiris then hears a whisper, described as, the hushed chitter in her head is unclear, inarticulate words pass through a forked tongue, but she feels it, understands a remarkable truth: she will never be alone, ever. This is of course the entity, and the first time it seems to directly intervene in Adiris' life, at a pinnacle moment of confusion and frustration, taking on the role of Adiris' god in a dark turn. Its insertion here is a shifting moment too though, as it continues to speak to her, and so Adiris seems devoted to the entity as a god, even though she doesn't quite realize what it is or its malevolence. It seems to be that purely its reality is all she needed to convince her to be devout to it. That whisper was all she needed, a concrete sign. From here the entity seems to almost take control of her body. She opens her heart, allows the whisper to seize her body, it says. So Adiris returns to her barn that night and kills him, her first sacrifice of sorts to her new god, the entity, and she does so in a particularly brutal fashion. It's worth keeping in mind though that despite this being the entity, Adiris seems to still view it as the sea goat instead, just another one of the entity's manipulations. Adiris later rises to become High Priestess of Babylon, with a plague infecting the city shortly after. All the other priests die and Adiris takes full control. She adorns herself in jewels and begins further ritual sacrifice to save her people from the plague, along with severing her own toe to save a woman. Soon Adiris too becomes infected though, and in attempts to appease the gods, she banishes herself from Babylon, eventually falling to the plague in a cave in Arashtu. Neither the body of Adiris nor those of her followers were ever found. It's interesting therefore that Adiris worshipped the entity, but she also formulated a religion of sorts toward it, accidentally or intentionally depending on how you read it. An interesting note about Adiris' religion too is its repeat mention of a place called the Beyond within its text, which is reached via a sacrifice's scream, the Beyond being the realm presumably. Therefore it seems that the Babylonians all this time were actually just praying to the entity, just under the guise of the sea goat. Haban being one of few people to see the malevolence that many viewed as benevolence. Therefore it's heavily suggested that Adiris or her religion is the origin point for the Black Vale, a cult that spans the omniverse and worships the entity and its realm as a place of salvation. This brings us on to our next character. Taurie Cain is on the flip side, being a survivor, yet another character who actually worships the entity. Taurie is interestingly a member of the Black Vale as well, or at least a branch of it, or an omniverse version of it called the Black Talon. But the Black Vale and Talon are seemingly interchangeable, or at the very least related, the Talon potentially being a more devout branch of the wider Vale, with them being far more zealot-like. Unlike Plague, who found the entity through her faith, or summoned it to her really, Taurie instead was raised to worship it and its realm from a young age. Taurie was raised in a suburb outside Glasgow alongside her brother Jone. This suburb belonged to the Disciples of the Black Talon, a cult essentially, said to have existed for centuries, with people who worship an ancient deity that exists in another dimension. The entity, of course. However, in this universe, the entity is referred to as the Black Talon, likely for its black claws, or talons, simply. The Disciples believing that the Talon would bring about transcendence for mortal existence. As a child, Taurie is taken by her parents to many ancient sites, performing strange rituals. They did things like boil the flesh off of decapitated heads and carve mysterious symbols into the skulls. The locations holding value due to them being overlaps, or bleeds as they called them. An overlap being a crossing between our world and the entity's realm, with it being theorized that the Black Vale are responsible for many of these, due to their ritual sacrifices bridging the two. In fact, it may have even been Adiris and her religion's ritual sacrifices that originally brought the entity into our world, the screams reaching the beyond, as it says. Sometimes the Disciples of the Talon would venture into the overlaps wearing heavy armored hazmat suits. A key thing that reoccurs with the Black Vale is that whilst they do worship the entity in its realm, they don't really know anything definitively and are in large part clueless to its goal or ambitions, but do seem to attempt to align themselves with them, further studying the areas of the overlaps by constructing underground bunkers beneath them. It's at an overlap in Göbekli Tepe where Taurie and Jone's parents never return after entering. Taurie defiantly enters the overlap without the use of a protective suit, Jone staying behind, too afraid to follow. It's here where she appears to partly experience the realm itself, hearing screams, seeing strange creatures, and the eyes of predators. Taurie finds her father, along with presumably her mother's suit, with her gone. She drags him out of the overlap, only escaping due to Jone coming in and drawing away the monsters who hunt her. The Disciples are impressed by Taurie's survival of the bleed without the use of a suit, but Taurie is changed by the event, with something dark said to have touched her heart, a similar line to when Wraith is first touched by the entity. As a result, she begins to have visions of Disciples hunting and sacrificing victims to the entity. This led Taurie to rise through the ranks of the Talon quickly, learning new knowledge and secrets as she did, and being sent across the world to locate strange artifacts, venturing into overlaps. She soon feels the darkness taking more of a hold of her, and she feels empowered by it. The Black Vale's view, put simply, is that they see the realm as a sort of transcendent paradise, a realm to ascend to, a salvation for humanity, the Disciples seeming to truly believe they are doing a great thing. One of the opposers to the Vale is Hattie Core, a paranormal investigator and vlogger in the main universe, who attempts to expose the Vale, all until she too is taken by the entity, disappearing at an overlap in the French Alps. Hattie's brother Jordan blames the Talon for her disappearance and begins attempting to try and expose them to the wider world. Taurie reaches the highest levels of the Disciples and learns that they are seemingly only able to enter the overlaps due to ritual sacrifices they perform, allowing them to survive. Jordan ends up taping one of these rituals and shares it online, exposing the Talon. The Talon, however, use their worldwide influence and convince most that it's fake. Taurie is sent to deal with him, this being her final task before becoming a member of the inner circle of masters, who is said to be set to one day become disciples in the Black Talon's domain, which presumably means killers of the realm. Taurie captures Jordan, taking him to an underground facility, but when it comes to killing him, she falters, as she's never killed anyone before. She feels a strange feeling overcoming her, as she realizes killing isn't as easy as it is in her dreams and visions. Just as the masters are about to intervene and finish the job, Taurie renews her conviction, lifting the dagger before a fog consumes her. When it clears, she finds herself in the realm, not as a disciple or a killer, but as a sacrifice or a survivor. So Taurie's story is pretty fascinating and gives us a very good insight into the mindset of those who worship the entity, and also what they believe they're achieving by doing so. Taurie in the realm is confused, she's in denial, and openly questions the entity about her placement as a survivor. Whilst the Vale may seem to know a lot and wield a lot of power, they don't seem to know all that much about the entity, its desires, nor its goals. Next, I wanted to discuss the Black Vale as a whole, and all of the other things we know about it. This does exit the realms of what we see in the game, in part, and dives more so into the deeper lore, but hopefully it's still interesting. As mentioned, the theorized or likely confirmed now origins of the Black Vale are Adiris, and her religion in Babylon, with the clear similarities between herself and Taurie with their chants and actions, and clothing style all aligning to some level. At least I think so. Comparing the two visually, and in how they seem to pray, it seems pretty close. Especially considering over the years, from BCE up until 2024 where Taurie presumably got taken, it's reasonable to assume there will be some adaptation of their religion. The Black Vale are mysterious as they don't really have a clear origin point, and they span the Omniverse almost as much as the Entity does, with there being variant versions of them throughout it, such as the Black Talon. A key thing they seem to always do though is to infiltrate government organizations, likely for power reasons. It enables them to have access to resources and classified information and stuff like that. Their coverage interacts with a lot of characters and from across many years. Some notable ones are Dredge at the Garden of Joy. The entire Garden of Joy community was essentially an experiment conducted by prominent Black Vale member Otto Stamper. It was an experiment planned, and the Vale themselves in some universes even seem to disagree with Stamper's control of the community, but it seemed to work in favor with it, resulting in the summoning of Dredge and the opening of an overlap within the Garden of Joy, or potentially the overlap was already there, which was seemingly the goal. Otto is actually theorized to potentially have closer ties to the Entity than many of these other characters, with him tying into not just Dredge's lore but also Doctor's, and Nicolas Cage's to some extent, suggesting he may have been one of few Vale members who was actually approved by the Entity in some capacity, and could have been one of its envoys. But his death at the hands of Doctor arguably confirms this isn't the case. Otto also recruited Doctor for the job at Larry's, enabling his horrible crimes, with Stamper at the time being a member of the CIA, a seeming relative of Stamper's, Pauline, or potentially a different universe version of Stamper, is also responsible for the taking of Nicolas Cage into the realm. She funds the Descent Beyond film project, recruiting Cage to play the Blight. When Nicholas performs the ritual that got Blight taken into the realm originally, the Entity is actually summoned by this recreation and he gets taken, and we don't really find out what happens to Pauline. Presumably though, she either gets taken too, or dies, or is left be, as the Stamper family may be envoys of some kind to the Entity, helping it to take people into the realm. Although there isn't any really direct evidence for this, and this is more of a theory, but it is strange how they seem to reoccur and be present in helping multiple characters get into the realm. The Vale have also had a strange interaction with the twins, who they bought after their mother was burnt by witch hunters. They conduct a series of bizarre experiments on them that have ties to the realm, almost as if they knew the twins were getting eyed up by the Entity, or alternately, they were responsible for the twins falling into the Entity's crosshairs. These strange experiments do seem to be a trend though, and are likely a part of the Vale's persistent attempts to get closer to the Entity and understanding it and its realm. It ends with them attempting to kill the twins via a ritualistic sacrifice, but they manage to escape, although Victor dies in the process, and Charlotte is subsequently hunted for years to come, but is never captured again. Another encounter happens with Artist, where she encounters a group known as the VAC Label, which is a not-so-subtle anagram for Black Vale. The VAC Label commissioned Kamina as an artist to paint, but Kamina discovers the corrupt politics within the VAC Label, and the strange disappearances of previous commissioned artists. This leads Kamina to accept the commission, but to instead paint a rebellious mural, uncovering the corrupt politics of the group and depicting them as Grim Reapers. This lands Kamina in hot water, with her and her friends being kidnapped by the Label, taking her to the Eyrie, where her hands are cut off and her tongue out, and also revealing themselves as cultists, attempting some sort of ritualistic sacrifice with Kamina. However, this is interrupted by an attack via crows, which swarm the Vale members, killing them, but also killing Kamina's friends, leaving her traumatized and with a feeling of guilt. The crows, of course, are the Entity and its intervention, so again it's interesting how the Entity actually decides to attack the Black Vale members, even though they worship it. Their goals don't always align. Blight seemingly encounters Black Vale members in his lore after he is pulled from a mass grave by what's referred to as an ancient mystery school, posing as a monastery. It's here where they're said to study texts, in search of ways to expand the human mind and allow it to reach other realms. Talbot helps them here to research something known as the soul chemical, a key ingredient later used in the Blighted serum, which they theorized will open the mind's eye. It's here where even the members of the school turn on Talbot, viewing him differently, and his memories become fractured, and it's unclear what happens to them. It's possible this wasn't the Black Vale, but could have been Imperiati, or even just a neutral branch simply looking for other realms, without the knowledge of the entity at all. But it's pretty suggested it's the Black Vale. Unknown also has ties to the Black Vale via the OSS, who investigated it. The OSS was one of the organizations that the Black Vale had infiltrated, along with the CIA. This means they probably were the ones investigating Unknown and are likely responsible for many of the heavily redacted documents that reference it, as they attempted to keep their findings secret, and from the general public. Their presence here to begin with is surely down to the overlap found in the Greenville cinema, which is how Sable enters the realm. Élodie puts a lot of work into investigating the entity after her and Felix's parents were taken or killed by it on Dire Island, the location where Blight disappeared. Élodie subsequently encounters the Black Vale whilst looking for an artifact in some Parisian catacombs, as part of her search for the entity and its realm. This artifact being the skull of Madeleine Desai, the twins' mother, and also being sought by the Black Vale. Élodie encounters one of the members while searching for the skull and gets stabbed by them, getting taken by the entity's fog after she draws out a symbol in blood, taking her to the realm. The Black Serpent Society is a branch of the Vale from another different universe, with its alternate name similar to the Black Talon. Serpent and serpent imagery, much like crows and the crow imagery, is also a common theme when it comes to depicting the entity itself. You'll even see it in the Black Vale icon or core logo. It has two serpent heads at the bottom. The Black Serpent Society are rivals with the Red Crown Clan, which Saku Nakano, the Red Crane, is a member of. The serpents wipe out the Red Crown Clan with help from a different universe Oni, dressed in green and gold. Some are killed and some are taken through an overlap to the entity's realm, which is interesting as here it really suggests that potentially this branch of the Vale does have more direct ties to the entity and is supported by it to some level, as the Oni is helping them. After this occurs, Saku enters the realm via an overlap and devotes herself to hunting down the remaining members of the Black Serpent Society, both in and out of the realm, including the green and gold Oni. She manages to kill a number of the disciples and saves Maurice as well, briefly traveling with him after they become friends. The other time we've seen the Black Vale explored is within the casting of Frank Stone, with one of the Vale's devotees, Augustine Lieber, a Black Vale member who aimed to get Frank Stone inducted into the realm as a killer, but also form an overlap within one of the many universes the game spans. Ultimately too, Augustine succeeds, destroying whole universes, but once again we're shown that the entity's goals and people like Augustine's don't necessarily perfectly align, with the entity killing Augustine. However, it also lets Frank into the realm as a killer, along with multiple other characters of the game as survivors. So while she succeeds, the entity still doesn't seem pleased or on the same page with her. Or potentially it is, and killing her is actually allowing her to ascend to the realm like the Black Vale wants. The Black Banquet event also hints toward the presence of the Vale and its disciples in the realm, with them being the focal point of the banquet. There's a letter that details that years of service have finally come to fruition. This seems to be focused on the Vale, yet occurs in the realm, seeming like the entity has hijacked this event this year, taking its structure for its own use and making it happen in the realm, where presumably it happens outside of the realm, where most of the Vale members are. The police report we see seems to depict the Temple of Purgation, but oddly it's investigated by the Cardiff police. So potentially this is actually meant to be another overlap site constructed by the Vale, with the temple possibly just being used as a representative image. Finally, we see one of the banquets, presumably from outside of the realm, from 1921. It's also possible though the entity is actually on the same side as the Vale in this instance, or may have finally embraced the Vale as its worshippers. Who knows? Finally, I wanted to cover a few other killers who, whilst they aren't true worshippers of the entity, they do definitely show more devotion than others, hinted at in small ways like with add-ons or brief sections of lore. Billy is one of these, with him actually having the entity's claws etched into his chainsaw, a sign of his love for the entity but also seemingly his loyalty to it. These claws on his chainsaw are said to represent the dark beast that lives in the fog, and to fill Billy with determination, which to me suggests a strong bond and loyalty that Billy has toward the entity. I think this is likely down to the entity being in some ways the only being to respect Billy and his freedom, his autonomy and life in a sea of people who abused and used him. Of course, this is somewhat sad, as in reality the entity is totally using and entrapping and, well, abusing Billy, but he also doesn't really know it likely, or he simply doesn't care, due to his love of the realm and his perceived freedom. Ghostface is another killer who seems to worship the entity to some extent and is often picked out as the entity's favourite due to the tassels on his outfit that were given to him by the entity as a special gift. We don't really know why the entity did this other than it was done because it likes Ghosty. The two do seem to have somewhat of a bond or deeper understanding as well, with Ghosty even getting signs or premonitions of his eventual arrival to the realm before it happens, and his quiet acceptance of it. It suggests possibly that Ghosty was aware of the realm prior to arriving, as there is evidence in the lore that he studied other killers and did know about the stories of in-realm killers such as Trapper. Therefore it's possible Ghosty did worship the entity to some extent prior to the realm and may have even constructed his persona in part to one day come here. Knight is a killer who definitely has some suggestion of worship toward the entity, but largely due to how he appears to view the realm as a paradise. This ties in with his lore where he's contracted as protection by Vittorio, who at the time was searching for the Lapis Paradisus, a stone said to hold ancient secrets about the realm collected by the Observers and the Imperiati, a sort of counter-group to the Black Vale, who aim to defeat the entity or bring about its downfall. Knight never really discovers what the stone is truly about, despite his attempts to get it out of Vittorio, via lots of murder and torture. Just as he's about to kill Vittorio, finally he disappears, taken by the entity, leaving Knight and his boys to face down an army of good, who have vowed to wipe them out as they're viewed as pure evil. As they fight hordes of this army of good, a fog consumes them, and Knight arrives into the realm. It's here where he realizes that this is what he had been looking for, even if this wasn't what Vittorio had been. This was his sublime, or paradise, the realm. This suggests to me that there is a sizable chance he would worship the entity with this view of the realm, especially if he found out that the Lapis Paradisus was in fact tied to this realm as well, which he probably would end up finding out, so he probably praises the entity to some extent. Legion are another set of characters who do appear to worship or at least look up to the entity more considerably than other killers, with them always wanting to be killers and to be given the same status and respect as other killers they viewed as greats. Therefore them being treated as such in the realm and being placed alongside the likes of figures like Myers, Ghostface and Jason will surely feed their ego in the exact way they desire, leading to a more devoted worship of the entity. This love is shown in small ways like with their Fuming mixtape add-on, which depicts a music track where the entity actually seems to kind of sing, or like more hum along to the music with its strange otherworldly sounds, showing a bond for sure. Legion in the Black Banquet also were given the role of security to almost defend the party and make sure everyone kept in line, showing their loyalty in a unique way, and potentially worship too, in the same way they worshipped some of the other killers outside of the realm. Alright, well that's gonna do it. I do hope you enjoyed, and let me know your thoughts as always down below. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.